Yeah, I think we can begin. People are still trickling in, but we can start. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is the third seminar in the GEOTRACES Online Seminar series. My name is Tal. I'm from Zurich, and I will be moderating this seminar titled Atmospheric Aerosol Deposition to the Global Ocean. So before we begin, just a few notes. This seminar series will run on a monthly basis. Each month at the last Tuesday of each month. The seminar series is organized by the GEOTRACES Early Scientist Committee, and the goal here is to bring together senior scientists as well as early career researchers. So the way these seminars work in the last two. In each seminar, we have two speakers, which will discuss a related topic. The first talk will be from a senior scientist, a senior speaker, who will present big picture perspective and sort of give an introduction to a specific topic. The talk afterwards will be given by an early career scientist, which will present either a specific case study, data, or emerging insights. Each one of these talks will last for 20 minutes roughly, and it will be followed by a moderate Q&A session of about 50 minutes. So feel free to raise your hand at the end of the second talk or write your questions in the chat. Just a few announcements. I would like to draw your attention to the next seminar on our series, which will be on August 25th. During July, we will not have a seminar. The topic of the next seminar in August will be particle dynamics, scavenging, and aggregation, with talks from Chris Hayes from the University of Southern Mississippi and Yang Jiang from Louisiana State University. Also, I would like to mention that the call for applications for the GEOTRACES Early Career Scientist Committee is approaching its deadline on July 3rd. So the GEOTRACES Early Career Scientist Committee is looking for new members, and you can distribute this throughout your network. We specifically encourage applications from candidates who are not currently represented in the committee, maybe from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, or China, or other countries. So this, we move on to today's seminar. Position of technicals motion. Speakers for today are University of Florida and Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Cliffton took part in many GEOTRACES cruises on many ocean bases, and today we will hear sort of the broad perspective or insights from these cruises in his talk titled Aerosols as a Source of Trace Metals to the Open Ocean. And this will be followed by a talk from Prema, who will discuss his current postdoc project at Stellenbosch University, titled Atmospheric Trace Element Deposition to the Southern Ocean. So with this, I invite Cliff to take the stage and share your screen.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to give this presentation. I sure hope I've understood the assignment. What I'm trying to do with this talk is kind of set some historical context, put what we're doing in some perspective, and then also kind of introduce some of the key unknowns that we have remaining in this field. I had really grand aspirations of covering lots of ground, but you use up your time really quickly, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for Prema to present some of his results. I'm happy to again speak to you all. I'm really grateful to GEOTRACES. As Tal kind of alluded to, it's been a major component of my career. And so I'm excited to see so many names in the participant list that I don't know, because it means that we've really grown this group. So with that, I'll hopefully get started here. If I make sure I got the right, there we go. So like I said, I wanted to kind of get back to where we started, and me not personally, but certainly the field of kind of this interaction of the air and the sea. And it really goes back, certainly there's observations of things like dust transport that go back thousands of years, but kind of the concerted study really launched kind of in the late 1970s through the 1980s and through 1990s, really led by some of the names that I've put on this slide here, some of whom are no longer with us, but many who are still quite active in the field. And I think it's important to kind of, recognize where we came from. I wanted to really target two specific projects that kind of set the stage for what came later. First was CREX, which was a study that was essentially across the entire North and South Pacific, looking at atmospheric transport and deposition to the oceans. Drawing your attention to kind of one spot in particular, the island of Inuitak. At this point, back in 1979, the researchers really had no expectation that there would be significant dust coming from land, just to put it simply. In fact, this island is located in the easterlies. It was expected to be a rather pristine environment. However, when they started collecting samples there, what they found was that there was this big spring signal of aluminum, which signified transport from Asia, essentially. And so it kind of dawned this recognition that atmospheric transport could be this really important process that delivers elements to the ocean. And some of those findings fed into what became the John Martin's iron hypothesis, kind of again demonstrating that this material can be carried through the atmosphere on the winds and out over to the open ocean. Now, following CREX, Aeros was established in the North Atlantic, kind of targeting looking at human perturbations to the systems. And so thinking about, lead emissions or sulfates, nitrates, some of those consequences of industrial activity and how they were impacting surface ocean chemistry. And I know I saw Pete Sedgwick sign in. I know he's quite familiar with this because one of the great things about Aeros is that it set up infrastructure throughout the North Atlantic that in some ways we still use today. There are still aerosol sampling towers at Bermuda, at Barbados, Macehead, and Tenerife. And so, these are great assets for the community to look at atmospheric transport, in particular across the North Atlantic. I also wanted to kind of make sure that I acknowledge kind of all the great people that work in this field, not just in GeoTraces, but beyond. These photos are from a series of meetings I was lucky enough to attend last year. And the top, it was the Iron at the Air Sea Interface Workshop, the third edition in Asheville, hosted by Nicholas Meskedzi of NC State. Lots of great scientists coming together to try to explore how aerosol iron interacts with the atmosphere, interacts with the ocean, and kind of identify pressing questions there. Also, the UN GESAMP working group on essentially atmospheric deposition met in Crete to identify different research questions. And I just wanted to, again, kind of acknowledge all the great folks that work in this field. And it can be observationalists like myself who are kind of working at that interface, but also marine scientists, atmospheric scientists, modelers, remote sensing specialists, a lot of different ways to attack some of these research questions. So if I didn't list your name on there and you're here, I apologize. I ran out of space, but a lot of folks making lots of great contributions. Quickly, I find that it's important to make sure that we're using appropriate terminology and kind of consistently. And this is actually something that's come out of some of those workshops, is that when you talk to an atmospheric scientist, they might have a different definition of a term than a marine scientist. And I also wanted to make sure that when I kind of use things interchangeably, that I don't do it on purpose, and that sometimes things do get put interchangeably. But basically, an aerosol is anything that's up there in the atmosphere. It could be a liquid or a solid. And we often use this as kind of an all-encompassing term to include everything that we might collect on a filter. And this can include lithogenic material. So that's kind of, for me, is when I say dust, that's what I mean, is material that's been uplifted off of a continent. You can think of the Saharan dust plume. You can think of Asian outflow. But that's kind of what we're talking about. Anthropogenic emissions might be, something that's coming out of a smokestack, something coming out of an incinerator. But that would be distinct from something like wildfire emissions, which would be more black carbon combustion emissions. And finally, there's also lots of kind of just the wear and tear, if you will, of modern life. We see signals of tire degradation, brake pad wear, all sorts of. I'm just using just general examples of things that are part of our modern day life across the world. But that gets up in the atmosphere, and if it gets up high enough, it can get blown out over the ocean, and ultimately, depending on what it's made of, might have consequences for the marine environment. Finally, I also wanted to mention sea spray. It's not something I focus on much at all because it's typically not a source of trace elements to the ocean. You'll see recycling of trace elements in sea spray, but that's coming from the ocean and then going back to the ocean. And my colleague Chris Marseille led a paper that explored this just a couple of years ago. If you're curious about that, I commend that paper to you. I wanted to just quickly go through the relative size of some of these particles because particle size is important in these processes, both for the efficiency of transport over ocean basins. Larger particles tend to settle out of the atmosphere more quickly than smaller ones, and so smaller particles will carry further in general. They also, and I don't want to get too far ahead of us, but smaller particles tend to be a little bit more dissolvable or more soluble. And so there's implications for trace element availability down the road. But we are typically talking about particles that are less than 10 microns. And so that's kind of represented right in the middle of this kind of infographic type diagram here. And down to even 2.5 microns, which we're talking about material that can actually be inhaled into your lungs, and so that has some human health aspects as well, which I won't get into. But of course, all of this is a spectrum, right? There's not necessarily hard cutoffs one way or the other. One thing, though, to note, if we look at this image, if you will, everything looks kind of perfect, and there's these perfect spheres of dust. Well, that's not what they look like. So here are some SEM images of, on the left, Saharan dust that was actually collected in the United States. But you can see, the dust inherently, these are minerals, right? They have crystals, and so they are going to be they're not spherical. They are going to have irregular shapes, and that also has implications for subsequently once they deposit into the ocean. Now, if we contrast that with, in this case, as an example, just using kind of smoke or biomass burning emissions, you do see much more of a spherical shape, and this is true also in kind of high temperature industrial combustion as well. So again, you have to kind of think of things not as a monolith. All right. Borrowing from our colleague Douglas Hamilton, also at NC State, I thought this review article did a really nice job of kind of both thematically sketching out essentially from cradle to grave, if you will, of atmospheric transport, and also visually. And so I don't want to dwell too much. I'm already behind on my schedule, so I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit. But in the image here, you can see examples of these various processes that I've mentioned, right? And so whether it's a volcanic eruption or dust uplift off of an arid or semi-arid area, we're getting material up into the atmosphere. And once it's up in the atmosphere, these particles are subjected to what we loosely term atmospheric processing. And that can include exposure to UV radiation, which might cause photoreduction of trace elements on the surfaces of the particles. They're also being exposed to varying aquatic or aqueous environments of varying pH. And so think about acidic processing on the surfaces of these particles that will then solubilize maybe some of those minerals and release things like iron into a more soluble phase while it's being transported over the ocean. All the while that we have deposition processes ongoing. So there's two main forms of deposition. Dry deposition is essentially gravitational settling. And so you might have particles that are literally falling out of the atmosphere onto the surface of the ocean and then contributing their constituents to the upper ocean. The other term that we use is wet deposition, and as it kind of implies, this is particles that are being incorporated into precipitation at various levels of the atmosphere, are being washed out into into the ocean. And these are quite different processes and can have different implications or relative importance based on where you are. And then ultimately, one of the primary reasons we care about all this is because this material can provide required micronutrients and reduce limitation in the ocean. We see things that result from atmospheric deposition, like you might observe a phytoplankton bloom. You might see a shift in communities in the upper ocean. And all of this has potential implications for carbon drawdown, perhaps. So some of the key unknowns, which I kind of wanted to target today, especially in the context of trace elements. I mean, atmospheric transportation and deposition of aerosols, it has far-reaching effects that go beyond just the impacts on the marine environment. But that's where I wanted to focus. One of the primary questions we have is what is the flux, right? At what rate do these aerosols enter the ocean, and how can that best be represented in models? And that's where you get the observationalists and the modelers. It's really important to talk to one another and make sure that each of us is kind of understands what the other needs and is trying to explore. One important note is that, as an observationalist, when we go out into the North Atlantic, for example, and I'm sampling aerosols, I'm not measuring flux. I'm measuring concentration or loading, how much material's in the atmosphere. And so we have to figure out how much of that is getting into the ocean. We have a couple of different ways to get at that, but it's important that these things are not interchangeable. That has to be recognized. Now, once that material enters the ocean, the important question is how much of it is bioavailable? And it turns out we're really bad at understanding what makes something bioavailable. And so what we've come up with over the last couple of decades is a variety of different methods in the laboratory to assess what we term solubility. And so that's the fractional solubility, so the amount that dissolves off of a particle, and we presume that material, now solubilized, is bioavailable to the ecosystem. But do those methods effectively simulate natural processes? Well, that can be kind of an open question. And then finally, and I know I will not have time for this, so I will just mention it, but one of the key questions and a source of uncertainty in a lot of marine system models is what is the residence time of this material in the upper ocean. And so if you're interested in that, a new paper from recently graduated UGA student Mariah Ricci, Dr. Ricci, is in GBC, which looks at some of our data from Hawaii and starts to try to get at this residence time question. So again, I wanted to kind of get us back to where we started to compare to where we are. And so hopefully you're familiar with the Deuce et al. Kind of canonical work from 1991, which was kind of trying to map out atmospheric input of trace species to the world ocean. And they put together this contour map, which is showing dust or mineral aerosol dust deposition to the oceans in milligrams per square meter per year. And you can see it's relatively coarse, right? And there weren't a lot of observations at the time. I mean, but they certainly nail the big dust producing regions like North Africa and Asia, and they get at trying to estimate deposition to the essentially the downwind areas of the ocean here. Now, if we fast forward roughly 15 years, Tim Jickles led another study looking at dust deposition globally, and in this case it's in grams per square meter per year. But even I can do this math in my head, so roughly on the same scale, if you will. But again, what they've shown is they have a little bit higher resolution. We've improved our understanding a bit of kind of how deposition varies as we move away from the source regions, and that's essentially helpful, or especially helpful for understanding some of these processes. But when you look at these kinds of plots, it tends to give a kind of a false sense of the process in that it seems rather static, right? And so again, and the deposition rates here are in grams or milligrams per square meter per year, and that may be sufficient for some purposes, but oftentimes we're looking at processes that are operating on much shorter time scales or seasonal. And so, trying to estimate dust deposition, while these are very useful tools, are not going to get you exactly what you need to best understand the inputs to your system. And to just kind of hopefully drive some of that home, I've stolen this visualization from NASA, which runs. It's representing August to September of 2024 for kind of global emissions and transport. And what I just want you to pick up is kind of the spatial variability here. First and foremost. And so obviously a huge feature right in the middle of your screen is Saharan dust, right? And this is in kind of late northern hemisphere summer, dusty periods. And you can see this pushing all the way across the entire North Atlantic basin. But also note that it's incorporating with other aerosol sources. So, for example, black carbon from fires in Africa. So these aerosols, as they're being carried through the atmosphere, they're mixing together. And so, if you're sitting on a ship out here at the equator, you're not getting just Saharan dust, and those aerosols might be interacting in ways that might enhance solubility. Also note in the green, this is represents sulfate, which could be something like a volcanic eruption, but also it's industrial processes. And what this is doing is creating acidic microenvironments in the ocean, or in the atmosphere rather, that could enhance solubility. The other part that's important if you're thinking about field work is as you go or you're thinking about doing work, let's say in the South Atlantic, you might expect that you're going to have your dust or your aerosol sourced from one continent or another, and it's going to depend on where you are. I've always thought that this image from Koch et al. Does a nice job of kind of showing the distribution of and transport of dust from various sources. And if you can pick it up on your screen, there's a kind of a dashed line that runs through these contours, and that's the 50-50 line. And so South American dust kind of dominates out here, and then until it meets kind of the South African dust signal. And the other thing I wanted to kind of hopefully set up the next speaker is that South American dust transport to the Southern Ocean is kind of the dominant source, especially into Antarctica. And so I think that'll have implications for what he's going to talk about. Just for magnitude scale, Natalie Mayewald put out a nice review some years ago, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, emissions in teragrams per year of various types of aerosols. It's just kind of, we have important things like biogenic organics, black carbon from biomass burning, again, sulfates and nitrates, largely from anthropogenic processes. But also, just to give you the scale of desert dust emissions, we're talking about 1,600 teragrams per year across all dust size classes. So this is a huge potential input to the oceans. Just to reinforce kind of this idea of temporal variability in the ocean, Dr. Coleman here at the Skidaway Institute in her dissertation put together these images for us from the North Pacific. These are aerosol optical thickness showing dust in the atmosphere in the North Pacific. Hawaii is kind of isolated here, but so this is transport from west to east. You can see in the top here, this is spring. This is the Asian outflow. And you can see the dust. It's significant. If you were to do a study out there in this time period, you'd think, wow, gosh, it is so dusty here. Look at all this flux. It's gonna be impacting the system. But if you were to do the same study in the fall, when it's not quite so dusty, you're gonna get a completely different outcome, right? And so short-term sampling, especially from ships, can miss aerosols, or it might catch a particularly dusty time. And so you have to be aware that these might not be representative of the forcings on your system. In some places, it's a little bit less significant. So going way back to the turn of the century, as my very rude children would term it, back in 2003, Chris Measures, Bill Landing, and I and others were out in the North Atlantic underneath the Saharan dust plume, working to look at distributions of trace elements in the North Atlantic. And so what I've tried to match up here is dissolved iron and dissolved aluminum from along this section from Iceland down past the equator to Brazil. And I've tried to match that up with concurrent aerosol measurements that we made. So these are total aerosol iron and total aerosol aluminum measurements along that same cruise path. And so note log scales here. So again, this is the Saharan dust plume right here. And so again, we're talking about changes in aerosol concentration of orders of magnitude, right? And you can see that impact in the water column as well. On the top pane here, this is dissolved iron. And so while you don't see it in the surface, right, of course, but what you do see is regeneration at depth, right? And so that's clearly, there's just so much dust from that plume going into the ocean that it's a pretty persistent signal, right? And then you also see it in the aluminum as well, and that's kind of more concentrated at the surface. But so this does show, I just share this to demonstrate that you can glean a lot of great information on hydrographic style section cruises that are looking at a snapshot in time, right? You just have to be aware of some of the limitations. We also have a more modern day, if you will, that hurts to say, but from 2020, from the Australian wildfires. And I know Prema's got a slide similar to this, so I won't dwell on it, but this was just a natural case study of the impact of, in this case, biomass burning, combustion in Eastern Australia, where they just, these were record-setting fires that emitted orders of magnitude more material into the ocean. And then as that was transported across the Pacific sector of the Southern Ocean and finally deposited, there was just this remarkable phytoplankton response, right? And you can kind of see that in these traces of the chlorophyll A along the same time frame. Now, what I couldn't find where I read this, but I think that what it was estimated that the phytoplankton absorbed nearly as much or about the same amount of carbon as the fires actually put into the atmosphere. Now, of course, this is a different talk, but how much of that might have ended up in the deep ocean where it was sequestered is unknown. I'm not going to dwell on sampling other than to just draw some distinctions here and describe what we're doing. So essentially, think of a vacuum cleaner. We're pulling air through filters to collect that material, and so that we can take it back to the lab for analysis. We will either use bulk collections, so that's collecting everything, but we also have cascade impactors that will divide the particles by their size. And so then you can kind of look at nuances in different chemistry and behaviors as particles shift from kind of large to small. Again, in the ocean, it can be quite challenging because you're on a big rusty ship. If you can get yourself to an island where the logistics are a little bit simpler in some ways and more complicated in others, you might have an opportunity to do some additional things. It's certainly more convenient for doing time series type work. But again, you have to find a reliable place that's protected, safe, good people to work with you to get your samples changed. Places like Bermuda are ideal for this. Just to kind of show what you get from these different things, we recently wrapped the Hawaii Aerosol Time Series, where we were collecting at the Mackay Research Pier. Again, this is Dr. Coleman's dissertation work. But to give you a sense, we collected for 2 years, and so we were able to, weekly collections, and so we're able to kind of log aerosol concentration and chemistry over those 2 years to look at temporal trends. If you're on a ship, you're not going to capture this. And just to kind of drive home what you might miss, again, is in orange here is data from 2022, blue is 2023, and across all of the lithogenic elements, aluminum, iron, titanium is down here, we got manganese, you see just a substantial, huge difference in the concentration in the springtime in 2022 than you do in 2023. And of course, understanding how that's going to impact the local systems is a fundamental question. But again, if you're on a ship and you just go there for 6 weeks, you might miss that. The other side of that coin is the spatial resolution. So this is data from the US Clivar GP15 Pacific Meridional Transect. And in this cruise, we essentially went from Alaska to Tahiti. I don't have time to explain the air mass back trajectory, so I'll skip those for now. But these kinds of studies, again, you can see gradients in atmospheric transport across basins, which the difference between the North Pacific and the Equatorial Pacific is quite stark for a lot of elements. And so that we can get a better sense for understanding the transport patterns. And of course, there's concurrent water column measurements going on that we can kind of look at to synthesize some of these ideas and better understand the processes. Given that I'm short on time, I just wanted to reinforce that what we're doing is collecting concentration data, and we have to have some method to assess flux. Now, Bob Anderson led a great review back in 2016 that looked at various methods. We use the beryllium-7 method, which essentially based on integrating the activity of beryllium-7 in the surface ocean and the beryllium activity on the aerosols, we can calculate a bulk deposition velocity and then convert our concentration data into a flux estimate using that deposition velocity. If you have questions on that, I commend to you a lot of the work from David Cadco. Mark Stevens has taken over much of that work, and also Yipeng He, who has got a relatively new paper, oh gosh, a year now, time flies, using this method to constrain aerosol deposition across the open ocean. And one of the cool things that we found is that there's a very strong relationship between precipitation rate and bulk deposition velocity, which makes sense in a lot of ways because wet deposition tends to dominate in a lot of different places around the ocean. And so please check out that paper. Dr. Coleman also has expanded some of this data set with her Hawaii data, and that those data shown here in these purple diamonds kind of fall along the same trends with what we've seen on ocean cruises in other parts of the world. All I'll say about kind of our solubility and bioavailability question is that there's lots of different ways to do this. Mingjing Tang and the SCORE Rusted group has done a lot of great work trying to intercompare these various methods, which can vary with the solvent they use, the exposure time, the amount of solvent, the pH. There's lots of different variables that go into it, and they're all kind of trying to assess different aspects of solubility. There's one, the acetic acid burger leach kind of unifies us with the marine particle community so that we are at least looking at the same things. And I think there's a lot of value in including that leach, which provides kind of an upper estimate of potential solubility. So please, last year we published this intercomparison of different leaching protocols, which kind of charted out where we agree and where we disagree. On the left here, there's the results of several different methods kind of grouped by their type. And so in light blue is what we would call a batch ultrapure water leach. In dark blue is a flow-through ultrapure water leach, which I've used through most of my career. Alex Baker's ammonium acetate leach, and then finally the burger leach. And so you can see, depending on what you use, you get different results. And then on the right here towards the top, these are comparing results from just flow-through ultrapure water leaches, okay? And so ostensibly we should be getting the same answer, except one thing, one of these groups was not using a backing filter behind their aerosol filter. And so when the water was going through the aerosol particles, potentially those particles were washing through because they were smaller than the porosity of the filter, right? The other groups had 0.2 micron backing filters to retain those particles. And so as a result, the group without the backing filter had apparently much higher solubility or a larger soluble fraction because these very small particles were washing through. And so again, there's a lot to consider as you engage in these kinds of studies. Different choices can produce different results. There's a wealth of literature out there, and certainly if this is something you're interested in exploring, there's lots of great people to ask. And so don't hesitate to reach out to me, Bill Landing, Alex Baker. I'm going to put them on the spot, make them volunteer to help as well. Lots of great resources available. And so I think given where I am in time, which I apologize, I did what I said I wasn't going to do, and I went too long. But I hope that that provides a nice introduction to kind of some of the questions that we're trying to answer in GeoTraces and beyond as it pertains to atmospheric deposition. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all and look forward to questions after the next talk. Thanks so much.
Prema, you can share your screen, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I am Prema Panda, is postdoc at Stellenbosch University, and thank you, GeoTraceS ECR community, to invite me for this presentation. And today I'll present my most of recent postdoc work on in Southern Ocean region, which state atmospheric trace element over the Southern Ocean region. So, it is this figure I taken from GeoTracer community, and thank you, Professor Cliff, to introducing a lot of initial theory about aerosol research or atmospheric trace element research. And basically, the atmospheric trace element is composed of dust or anthropogenic aerosols from combustion and biomass burning sources. But here I'll focus on Southern Ocean. So, hi, Southern Ocean. This is a nice paper from Natalie Muhuwar, which in 2018 they published these things about the iron limitation over the Southern Ocean. And as a geotraces community, we all know how important Southern Ocean is and how it is nutrient limited. But the interesting fact where I want to highlight here, like over the Southern Ocean region, if we remove the atmospheric depositions, it is also limited not only for small phytoplankton, but also it is all limiting for other diatoms and diatoms. So in this highlight, when we are focusing over the Southern Ocean, this is another model-based observation by the same from the same paper, where it's highlighting South American and African outflow, as well as the Australian outflow, how it is combiningly impacting Southern Ocean. And here you can see especially the Atlantic sector of Southern Ocean and Indian Ocean sector of Southern Ocean. They highlighted the strip black line, which is showing the combustion sources of impacting these sectors of the Southern Ocean. And this is another study from Koch et al. 2023, where it's highlighting how much dust it is emitting from the Southern Ocean region, like Southern America, South Africa, and Australia region. And this dust is not only stayed in this one single place, it is get mixed together due to the strong westerly wind and redistributed throughout the globe. And thank you again for introducing all this theory in earlier presentation. And here also, I am also showing the same presentation, the other source of anthropogenic emissions or like biomass burning, how it is impacting Southern Ocean region, where in this paper, Tang et al. 2021, they highlighted how the biomass burning and Australian wildfire impacting and enriching chlorophyll concentration over the Southern Ocean Pacific sector of Southern Ocean as well as the South of Australia region. So recently also Tal published a paper in Nature which he highlighted the anthropogenic zinc and lead coming from the like different sources and impacting Southern Atlantic Ocean. So yes, Southern Ocean getting a lot of aerosol from different dust sources and anthropogenic emission sources. But when we look at the GeoTraceS Intermediate Data Product 2025, we can see all this dust and trace element concentration over the Southern Ocean region. You will find very few cruises measure this concentration of trace element and dust, especially all these cruises were from our Australian colleagues where they measure all the trace elements and dust around the Australia or Southern Ocean sector of Indian Ocean. Other than the GeoTraceS IDP, we have few other study by Baker and other people from our atmospheric aerosol trace element research community, and a few other paper like from Indian Ocean sector and near to the Southern Africa, like Southern Ocean, or like closer to the Southern Ocean region of Indian Ocean sector, but there is a large area where there is no published data till now. So we are focusing on this area to understand why it is like how much dust coming to this area specifically. And as you saw in the previous presentation, like a lot of Patagonian dust coming towards this region, and it is also getting with the Southern African dust. So this area is very vital to understand how much dust coming from which sources. And before describing the cruise and other data, I want to highlight the seasonal wind pattern over the Southern Ocean region. You can clearly see this wind pattern is dominated by westerly wind during austral summer, which is from June to August. And in the subpolar region specifically, because and subpolar region we are considering it 40 degrees south to 60 degrees south region. And if you see during the austral summer, during December to February, the westerly wind speed get reduced, and this impact of dust transport expected to reduce a lot during the austral summer. But if you see the polar region, which we are considering latitudes lower than 60 degrees south, it is also getting a lot of dust from easterly winds over this region. So I want to present these things to understand the dynamics of the atmospheric dynamics. And in earlier presentation, Professor Cliff already showed the impact of mixing of different type of aerosols. So everywhere we are seeing, we can't expect a single type of aerosol. It will be get mixed together and getting transported to the remote oceanic region like Southern Ocean. And keeping in view, we collected few aerosol samples in GeoTraceS process cruise 23 during the austral summer spanning from 13 December 2024 to 13 February 2025, which is like really austral summer. And we divided this whole cruise track into the subpolar region and polar region, and 14 trace aerosol sample collected by both the bulk sample collection and size segregated sample collection by one of my colleague, Dr. Helen Bose. And we also plot some back trajectory, and you will see this subpolar region is mainly dominated by Patagonian dust, like air from Patagonia region, and it is shown in this figure in blue line, like subpolar region, where westerly is dominantly transporting all the atmospheric material to the remote oceanic region, while in the polar region, it is getting a lot of wind from eastern Australia, sorry, eastern Antarctica and eastern part of the globe, and this is dominated by the easterly. So this part is already covered by Professor Block. Block says still I'll explain it a little bit. We collected both the size segregated and box aerosol samples, and we use these bulk aerosol samples for molecule each, and this pH of molecule it's 6.4 and it is considered as the mild leach as per the GEOTRACES protocol. And we also digested these samples with HF and HNO3 to understand what is the total trace element coming to the ocean. And we also measure digested sample or like total trace element sample in the aerosol samples collected in size segregated aerosol like impactor samples to understand which size fraction impacting which part of the element, and all these trace element were measured in using ICP-MS. And you can see we measure a whole suite of element, and for the soluble trace element where we use millicube as a mild leachate, and it is a flow-through leaching protocol. And you can see few of the element is detectable by the soluble trace element, but 70% of this hatched element like chromium, manganese, nickel, lead, they were 60 to 70% of samples. Like out of six, it is we have to remember before that the Southern Ocean is very a remote area, so we able to detect 60 to 70% of sample in this for this element, and 20 to 30% of aluminum, phosphorus, silicon, and cadmium. But if we use different kind of leaching like Borger leach, we might able to detect all the element. Or if we instead of QR ICP-MS, if we use higher resolution ICP-MS sample instrument, so we might able to detect other things which are below detection limit. So I am still working on these things. But in addition to trace element, we also measure chemical composition like cation like sodium, potassium, and ammonia and calcium, and anions like nitrate, sulfate, chlorine to understand what is the sea salt contribution to the aerosol, or how it is impacting like sulfate and potassium impacting the aerosol compositions. So keeping that, so here I am showing some result of this subpolar and polar region. From this figure onwards, I'll show all my subpolar samples in blue box and my polar samples in red box. And this dust concentration is estimated from aluminum concentration. And you can see subpolar region is higher on the concentration of dust compared to the polar region. And the mean dust concentration over the Southern Ocean region during the austral summer, we got like 37 nanogram per meter cube, which is really very less compared to other part of the globe. And when we are made, so check the other trace element compositions like chromium, manganese, nickel, cobalt, copper, lead, zinc. In x-axis, you can see this blue are like subpolar samples, and this red are polar samples for same element. And in my y-axis, I am showing total trace element samples, which is like acid digested aerosol samples. So you can see they are more or less comparable, but still subpolar region is relatively higher other than few, and but this polar and subpolar, like whole austral summer region, Southern Ocean receive 42 picomole per meter cube of iron, uh, and manganese is 1.2 picomole, which is much more less compared to all other part of the globe. But in case of iron and zinc in subpolar, iron, zinc, and lead in polar region, we receive higher amount of iron, zinc, lead compared to the subpolar region. But to understand what is the different type of source, we did a preliminary calculation by calculating enrichment factor, which is basically shows how much it is enriched from the upper continental crust. So in all the aerosol samples, like crustal materials like titanium, is very below the enrichment line, and manganese, iron, cadmium, surprisingly cadmium, so below the enrichment line, but chromium, nickel, copper, zinc, lead, they are above the enrichment line. So it might be getting influenced from the anthropogenic emission sources. So here the major factor we have to focus, like if we are getting iron below the upper continental crust, or like below the enrichment line that doesn't refer other element on getting enriched from anthropogenic emissions, it is every individual element behaved independently. So it is very important to measure all different kind of element instead of one single or like one or two different element. So when we check the solubility, soluble trace element concentration over in these samples, we get like few of the samples what I said earlier, like aluminum, we get very in few samples were below detection limit, which is quite expected, but overall subpolar region getting higher soluble trace element concentration compared to the polar region. So this, for example, soluble iron is like 2.1 picomole per meter cube. And when we compare similar means overall compiled study from Douglas Hamilton 2022, our current sample concentration falling the lower limit of the all global value, which is like 0.12 nanogram per meter cube, which like you can see it is the lower limit of this uh, like standard bar. And when we measure the fractional solubility, where Professor Park already explained, it is the ratio of soluble trace element with total trace element, and its percentage of soluble trace element present in total trace element, where iron shows very 6% solubility. And you can see other than manganese and zinc, lead, other than these three elements, you can see the y-axis, which is showing fractional solubility of this element, and x-axis the elemental compositions, like different elements. You can see the polar region receive higher solubility, especially for iron and copper. So although soluble trace element, polar region receives a lower soluble trace element, their fractional solubility is higher. Then when I look into the different factors, because in previous talk, Professor Cliff already explained what is the different factors explaining the impacting the aerosol solubility, because as atmospheric chemistry, we always like to consider different factors or explain our study in terms of solubility. So few of them which I'm listing here, like particle size, mass load or dust load, and along with that atmospheric acidity, which is otherwise called atmospheric processing, and dust mineralogy can be a driving factor of aerosol solubility, and anthropogenic emissions like fire and biomass burning. So considering this fast aerosol means factor, which is impacting aerosol particle, aerosol fractional solubility, which is particle size. So you can see in this graph, I am showing different element and their total trace element relative contributions. It is not like soluble fraction, it is the total digested aerosol sample in size segregated fraction. And I try to get soluble fraction, but I unable to detect them because their concentration is very low. You can see from ball composition, if their ball composition is like 2 to 3 picomole, so their size segregated fraction will be very less. But the main important factor is like in subpolar region, like it is a representative sample of subpolar region. You can see like majority of the element dominated by the coarse aerosol, and you can identify the coarse aerosol, which is like PM 2.7 to PM 10 and PM 3 to PM 7.2, which is like we consider like greater than 2.5 micrometer diameter considered as a coarse fraction, and less than 2.5 micrometer diameter is fine fraction. And in this region, this PM, the subscript is like their diameter fraction, and you can see the coarse element and coarse fraction of aerosol is dominated over the subpolar region, which is showing lower solubility of many element. But in polar region, the finer fraction, which is like less than 2.5 or less than 3 micrometer diameter, is dominating. So it is showing higher fractional solubility. So yes, particle size can be a driving factor over the Southern Ocean aerosol fractional solubility. And coming to the mass load, it is a classic example where we are compare total trace element with fractional solubility of same element. In y-axis, you can see the iron shows a very good hyperbolic correlation with total trace element and fractional solubility, unlike manganese and copper, which is not showing. And this type of iron and correlation is already explained by one of the most cited paper like Solkowitz et al. 2012, where they observed the hyperbolic relation of the dust load or mass load and their relationship with fraction solubility. But why other element is not showing this type of relationship, I try to decipher, okay, this copper concentration is like really spreading. So whether it is really impacted by different geographical location. And to be honest, like when I'm mentioning polar and subpolar regions, we have to keep in mind, I'm not talking about the water mass, I'm talking about the geographical location. Sorry to forget to mention about it earlier. So in polar region, when I divided this correlation in polar and subpolar region, the subpolar region, still I didn't get any correlation. So copper not following this, deep copper is not depending upon the mass load. So the highlight of this thing is like every individual element behave differently. So that might be some other controlling factor. So I try to correlate with total atmospheric acid, and this formula it is well explained in our in Bob et al. 2006. So where we consider molar concentration of nitrate and 2-time molar concentration of NSS sulfate. I want to highlight the NSS sulfate stand for non-sea salt sulfate. So it is when I correlated my fractional solubility of my aerosol samples with this total atmospheric acid for iron, I get a very good, very it's moderate correlation with total acid, which is expected in open ocean region like Southern Ocean. And also I get a low to moderate correlation with manganese and also copper. So it might be a vital controlling factor over the Southern Ocean region. So when I try to again divide one of the element like copper as per subpolar and polar region, you can clearly see like subpolar copper is showing good like moderate positive correlation with total acid, which is suggesting atmospheric acid either it is getting transported with atmospheric acid or it is getting processed more vigorously during their transport to the remote ocean location. But polar region showing relatively low but positive correlation. So irrespective of geographic location, all this atmospheric processing plays a vital role determining aerosol fractional solubility. So another important factor is atmospheric dust mineralogy. So here is a nice work by one of my colleagues like Morgan et al. 2022, where they collected the aerosol sample from McDonald and Heard Island of Southern Ocean region, and in there they got a lot of emission or like source aerosol source from these volcanic islands. So when she correlated with other trace element or like when she plotted her samples with respect to upper continental crust, this VCC value, it was showing a higher enrichment like above the UCC value, but when she correlated with basalt or basanite, it was correlating well. So mineralogy can be a driving factor of these aerosol samples, like controlling the fractional solubility. And recently, one of her paper also along the Mozambique channel, where she highlighted the atmospheric emission, like also the mineralogy of mining dust, which is enriching or chromium or nickel, or like different kind of mineralogy impacting differently in different aerosol samples. So Southern Ocean aerosol also can be partially controlled by the mineralogy of different aerosol samples. I'm currently looking at the mineralogy, and other than the mineralogy, the other and last drivers of aerosol solubility is anthropogenic emission. So we use NSS potassium, vanadium, levoglucation as anthropogenic tracer, or like biomass. Not we can say all anthropogenic tracer, it will be like biomass bonding tracer. So all this biomass bonding tracer during means during our cruise campaign, especially during the austral summer, were absent. And one of the previous study by model study by Ito and Koch 2027 suggested during the austral summer, which is like December to February, 90% of the Southern Ocean is dominated by dust compared to the other season, especially austral spring and September to November, where relatively 70 to 80% is dust and rest of the anthropogenic emission. So that's why it is fitting well with my current data where anthropogenic emission is minimal. So coming to the summary of my study, like the Atlantic sector of Southern Ocean received minimal dust during austral summer and owing to its wind pattern, and polar region shows lower soluble trace element but higher solubility due to atmospheric processing and dominance of fine particle size, and other than like few elements like manganese, zinc, and lead, because there might be different drivers for them, and each element behaves independently, and dust mineralogy can be a driving factor controlling solubility along with atmospheric processing over the Southern Ocean. But anthropogenic influence during the austral summer is minimal, but higher anthropogenic contribution expected during the austral winter. But to understand atmospheric aerosol over the Southern Ocean, more and more observation needed and more atmospheric trace element measurement is required because it is so diverse, and the major challenge is to measure these things in lower concentration. And here also one of my future idea or like future projection of my work, where I'm planning to collect more aerosol samples like this fire samples, and they measure trying to understand the impact of fire over the chlorophyll concentration. Southern Africa also received a lot of fire and it is gradually increasing. And the major challenge to measure the fire is the fire season is Austral's winter, which is like from June to October, or winter and spring season. So I'm trying to collect some aerosol samples, either cruise-based or coastal aerosol samples, to measure this fire impact on the aerosol trace element compositions. And lastly, I'll thank my postdoc supervisor, Professor Fees, and other colleagues like Helene, Morgan, Jenny, Charney, and other GEOTRACES is here. Thank you so much, and I am open to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cliff and Prema, for these great talks. Do we have any questions for our speakers? So if there are no questions, I think, Prema, I have a question maybe.
Yeah.
When you're doing these sequential leachings, do you notice any aluminum in your labile or molecule leach?
Yeah, in dissolved fraction, I do able to detect aluminum in it. But that is like that's what I highlighted, categorized in differently, like only 20 to 30% of samples, like even I have only 14 samples during this cruise. It is like 2 to 3 samples I able to detect in like when I use leaching with molecule. But if I'm expecting, if I use Borger leach, I will definitely able to detect in all samples.
Okay. Do you think this comes from mineral dust?
Yeah, like aluminum, we are hypothetically considering it is everything is coming from mineral dust, but maybe due to different mineralogy, like if it is more refractory, it is not getting processed during the atmospheric
Okay.
processing. Yes.
Diksha, you have a question?
Hi. Hi, Tal. And hi, Prem. How are you doing?
Hi, Diksha. I'm doing good. Thank you.
So I have one question. As I'm not very well versed with the aerosol leaching protocol, but I was just thinking that for aerosol leaching protocol, why is HF or nitric acid used as standard when in the real atmosphere particles are processed by nitric and sulfuric acid? If HFN or HNO3 meant to represent total elemental content rather than what's actually bioavailable, or is there any other evidence it better mimics realistic atmospheric leaching too?
Oh, okay. Yes, you are right. This HF-HNO3 leaching means HF-HNO3 digestion represent total trace element present in the dust. It is not representing bioavailability at all. To understand how much bioavailability, we measure soluble fraction either leaching with molecule or with acetic acid or buffer like Berger leach, and that represent what is the how much bioavailable, and that's why we consider it is fractional solubility
So
in that form.
can we merge these two protocols together to get the answer for both the question?
Like Berger leach and labile leach, like molecule leach and Berger leach you are asking about, right?
Um, I mean, like, I don't remember the nomenclature, but it's just like
Yeah,
the weaker acid, like sulfuric acid. Sorry, weaker acid, and then your
molecule.
molecule. Yes.
No, that is the thing. Like Professor Cliff already explained, we can't, like, that's what we are currently working on in this rusted program or and this Mingjing paper. What he showed, like, we are currently discovering, like, trying to figure out which will be suitable for mimicking oceanic water, like ocean.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a question from Bob Anderson.
Yes, thank you. I was at a GeoTraceS cruise workshop last week where it was speculated that burger leach solubilizes iron from authigenic clays. So my question is to both speakers, have you seen any evidence of the burger leach dissolving iron from authigenic clays?
That's a great question, Bob. And unfortunately, since I wasn't there at the workshop to capture or catch the context for that. I mean, I know from working with Danonymous, they have a series of calculations they do to separate these various fractions, and we don't replicate those same comparisons on the aerosol side, and so I guess my confident answer to you would be I don't know. Um, that's not something that I've necessarily considered uh, looking at the aerosols.
Yeah, I also agree with Professor Cliff completely.
Another question from Arvind.
Hi, Prem. It's nice to see you here. Am I
Hi.
audible?
Yes,
Hi.
yes, you are audible.
So, it's always like a doubt, like when uh, we try to know the solubility of aerosol or the marine setup, and experiment what you people are performing is mostly you do the leaching with the molecule. Does this
Yes.
molecule represent the seawater? Because ultimately our aim is to know how this aerosol is getting like the solubility of aerosol in the seawater and how they're affecting again like productivity and other things. So it's being always my one of the question like why can't we the seawater? Why always the molecule?
So I'll jump in on that. You certainly can use filtered surface seawater. There's several groups that do that. One of the challenges is that it stretches the intercomparability between research groups. One of the
Yes.
advantages of DI water is that it's essentially uniform. There may be some
Yeah.
pH variation depending on how fresh it is out of your milieu system, but generally it's uniform across research groups, and so we can better intercompare results around the world.
Yes.
Also, we have shown in the past that it's more ultrapure water dissolution experiments are more representative of what you might expect within wet deposition. And given the importance of wet deposition globally to the surface ocean, it's a reasonable parameter to assess. Now, of course, once that raindrop hits the surface ocean and powers through the microlayer and into seawater, everything changes, of course. So, and kind of circling back to the previous question about the burger leach or acetic acid. I mean, so what, trademark Bill Landing here, but what we kind of think of as the ultra pure water kind of sets what we would think of as a lower bound. So like the minimum solubility you might expect. And then the burger leach is some longer time scaled upper bound of like the maximum amount you might expect to dissolve on kind of the relevant time scales. And so if you were to ask me, do I ever think we're going to get to a unified answer to what like aerosol iron solubility is? I don't think that we will. I think we will always kind of have this spectrum of different processes that we use to assess different natural processes. And it's going to be, and this comes from Rusted, the SCORE group. It's imperative that folks engaged in this work are trying the best they can to use certified or consensus reference materials within their analytical workflow. I would advocate for everyone to try to at least do some form of ultra pure water or deionized water leach,
Yeah.
to kind of baseline, and so we can compare. And then if there's other processes they want to do, sequential leaching of different strengths, maybe to address other more specific questions, that would be great too. But the community has been hampered by lots of folks doing lots of different things, and then it all getting kind of shoved into the same pipeline of this is aerosol solubility, and we're really not looking at the same things. So I apologize, I got long-winded in my answer to you, but that's kind of my point of view on it.
Thanks.
Maybe one question from the chat, and we will conclude with this. There's a question in the chat. Is there any reason why you didn't include arsenic and selenium in trace element analyses, or were they just below detection limit? I guess this question can be for either of you, because these elements are not usually included.
Yeah, so basically, I was also focusing on the nutrient type of element or like its impact on the atmospheric, like impacting ozone biogeochemistry. So I did measure, so I don't have a solid answer for this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, for us, it's just not. It was an operational choice going back. Each instrument has different capabilities. I had a heck of a time with our CFast, and it would have required a hydride generator in order to kind of get things working. And so it was kind of just outside our suite of elements that we typically look at for the soluble fraction. I think especially in the Southern Ocean, I mean, your levels of detection are going to be challenging.
Yeah, that is another major challenge I do agree.
Okay, so I think with this we can conclude our third seminar of the series. I would like to thank our speakers again. Sorry.
Hi, yeah, there is one more question in the chat regarding the iron concentration.
Okay, so this is a question for Cliff. What is the reason for the high iron concentration? What is the reason for the iron concentration not high in the surface ocean compared to deeper 200 meters in the Atlantic?
That pesky carbon pool, that big box with carbon. No, I make a joke, but I believe the biological communities are accessing that iron quite quickly and incorporating it, because that was the dissolved iron profile. So you're seeing that drawdown, and then the subsequent depth. That's where you're seeing regeneration and vertical transport.
Hey, Cliff, let me just jump in. If you look carefully at the surface iron on that section, there is a slight enrichment under the dust plume, but it's just not huge. There's much more dissolved iron subsurface as a result of the regeneration. There is a slight enrichment in the surface waters.
But only if you keep your fingers out of the sample.
Yeah, true.
Are there any more questions? So I think now we can conclude the seminar and thank our speakers again. And we all hope to see you in the next seminar on August 25th. And thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's great to see so many
Yeah.
familiar faces. Thank you so much.
Yeah, true.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Tao. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thanks, Willie. Bye.